people realize that India's financial capital, Mumbai, actually the Mumbai metropolitan region, has a continuous urban history of 2,300 years. But 2,300 years ago, the commercial heart of the region was at the other end, not South Mumbai, but rather up north in Sopara. By the time of the 1st century CE, when India was at the center of the Indian Ocean trade world, Sopara was a great port city. As this ancient mariner's map, the Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, shows. Archaeologist Dr. Suraj Pandit is an authority on the ancient history of North Konkan and has been on excavations at many sites including Sopara. He takes us on a journey to this port city and tells us how this region evolved.
Its geographical location, basically, it's in the you can say it lies between two major river valleys, like river deltas, I will say. One is Vaitarna in the north and Ulhas in the south, and though both are very important rivers from Konkan region. Again, when we look at Sopara, it's an island. It used to be an island. Now it's a part of mainland. So probably after Bharuch in the south, Sopara was the first natural port which they came across, and it gradually evolved as a commercial center. Prior to that, I see Sopara as as it is being described in Hindu traditions or Puranic traditions, or also in Buddhist traditions, literary traditions. It is being described as the known, the end of the known world kind of thing, because the name of river Vaitarani or Vaitarana itself indicates the end of the known world, in Puranic tradition. So earliest known evidence from Sopara comes in the form of Ashokan edicts, edict number 8 and edict number 9, which we have found, the fragments of which we have found in the vicinity of Sopara village. And the Mauryan period, this is the phase, like 3rd century BC marks it as a religious, political and commercial center. So probably that was the edge of the known world, in sense like civilization emerged in Ganga Valley and they started reaching out in all the directions. And probably this was the edge till where they have reached in the pre-Mauryan period. And probably Sopara was identified as a potential commercial center, potential administrative center, because Sopara can be accessed by sea, by road, and it's ideal place for establishing a port town, probably. So these are the possibilities which make Sopara a very significant religious, commercial and political center during the times of the King Ashoka himself. The earliest reference to Sopara comes from Sutta Pitaka, which refers this area, that is the North Konkan area, as Sunaparanta. So it is basically the area occupied by uncivilized or barbaric people. And even today, if we see the Palghar district and the Dang district of Gujarat, they are tribal districts. So Periplus in 1st century, Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, the text in 1st century AD says that the Sopara is surrounded by tribals, So probably Sopara emerges as an urban center which is controlling resources from neighboring villages and the tribal areas and connecting it with the other urban centers on the Deccan Plateau in the Indo-Roman trade period. So roots of those goes back to Mauryan period. So Sopara emerges as one of the most important townships in this area.
This is all that remains of the port of Sopara today. Around 58 kilometers north of the commercial districts of Mumbai, the region of Nala Sopara has emerged as a grubby suburb of a city fast expanding north. However, 2000 years ago, this region would have been very different. In fact, Sopara was an island at the mouth of two rivers which drained into the sea. The geography of this stretch of coast would have looked very different then. Sopara was the center and the areas around it provided the support structure. For instance, the Kanheri caves on the main Salsette island acted as a vihara or residency for the monks who frequented the great Sopara stupa.
So when we look at the geoarchaeology of Sopara, we know that it is an important port in the south of Bharuch, and that was only accessible during the high tides. So it makes the port very tricky but safe. You know, when you are in the port, you are safe, kind of thing. Now, when we look at the literary sources, again, it is mentioned that Sopara is one of the most important ports in the south of Bharuch. So, from Bharuch to Sopara, there was no port in the ancient period in between, what we see. Now, Sopara is connected with all other commercial centers in the region during the Satavahana period. So, the reference goes back to 2000 years before present, and we are talking right now about Kalyan, Elephanta, that is Gharapuri Island, and Chaul. So, Sopara becomes a key point which connects all these places by sea and by land. On the other hand, Sopara via Naneghat gets connected with Junnar and other important sites on Deccan Plateau. Looking at Sopara, Sopara emerges as an Indo-Roman port because when the traders started exploring sea routes, after Bharuch, Sopara was an ideal natural port. One of the caves at Kanheri, which gives us an interesting art historic evidence coming from, you can say, the entire Western India, which connects this region with the Central Asia. You know, so for example, there is evidence of Mathura style image. There is a depiction of Bactrian camel. In sculptural art, we can actually see influences coming from the Kshatrapa art of Gujarat. So, if we draw these points and connect them, it talks about a trade route coming from Central Asia to Sopara. You know, so in a way, that is an offshoot of Silk Roads, which makes Sopara one of the most prosperous cities in the region. Now, looking at Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, we know what kind of material is being purchased or sold at Sopara. So there are some of the materials to mention, like cloth, then ivory. So probably there is every possibility that the Pompeii ivory probably has traveled from Sopara or Bharuch, you know, like Tyre to Sopara and Sopara to Pompeii, kind of thing. So this is what makes Sopara a unique port and make it prosper in the due course.
Sopara was clearly at the center of a global trade network, and Suraj believes that the famous Pompeii Lakshmi, a sculpture found under layers of lava in the ruins of Pompeii, going back to somewhere between the 1st century BCE and 1st century CE, was shipped out of Sopara. But as Sopara emerged as an important port, it also became a religious center. Trade and faith walked hand in hand in the ancient world.
See, when we talk about Sopara emerging as a religious center, it evolves in hand, like simultaneously with its emergence as a port or a commercial center. You know, for that we need to understand the nature of Buddhism in a way, because as I understand Buddhism is an urban religion. So it was in a way responsible for spread of urbanization in the non-urban areas. So wherever urbanization went in the early historic period, Buddhism has reached. It is not just in India, but even out of the physical boundaries of India. And also wherever Buddhism reached, urbanization has followed it. And the main reason behind that was the traders and monks, they were traveling on the same trade routes. So when we look at literary sources, like as we talked about Sutta Pitak, there is a story of Purna or Purna. There are a couple of stories coming from Vinaya Pitak also, of various Nikayas in Buddhism, like Mula Sarvastivada Vinaya Vastu is a text associated with Mula Sarvastivada Vinaya, Mula Sarvastivada Nikaya. It talks about two monks, one is Punna and other is Shronakotikarna, from this particular region who had gone to, who had visited Shravasti just to see Buddha and receive initiation from him. And then they came back. So in a way that talks about how monks are being, how monks are traveling, how ideas and how philosophies are traveling on the trade routes and influencing the commercial centers.
The emergence of Sopara as a Buddhist hub is linked with both legend and geography. Legend has it that Purna, a local Sopara trader's son, embraced the Buddhist faith and promoted it here. But look at the ancient map of the trade routes emanating from the Dakshinapat and you will see a series of Buddhist caves and viharas strewn across the way, ending at the site of Sopara.
Buddhist Sopara is an interesting phenomena to look at when we look at the Western Indian cultural history. Now, there are numerous cultural centers or commercial centers which we see emerging on Deccan Plateau, like we have Nasik, Junnar, Kolhapur, Karad, and going beyond that, the second row is Usmanabad, like Ter, Paitan. All these are commercial centers linked to each other by trade routes. And obviously what we see is on these trade routes, not only just traders who were traveling, they were accompanied by monks. So there are various monasteries coming up, the structural monasteries as well as rock cut monasteries. And interestingly, many of these monasteries have inscriptions, and some of those inscriptions talk about donors coming from Sopara. So we can actually you can say link the trade routes and Sopara with the help of this network of monasteries. So for example, though Periplus of the Erythraean Sea, the text talks about if you have to go to Ter, get down at Bharuch, and then there is a route narrated from Bharuch to Ter. But probably Sopara played a vital role because Sopara to Junnar via Naneghat, and then Naneghat from Junnar one can go to Godavari Valley and then travel along the Godavari to Paitan, which was emerged in the later Satavahana period as capital of Satavahanas, and then to the down, low Godavari Valley, where we can actually see various commercial centers and religious centers emerging up in the eastern coast of India. So in a way, when we look at Sopara, it is not just north-south connection, it is east-west connection also. Interestingly enough, the bronzes which we see coming from Sopara, which were excavated by Pandit Bhagwan Lalendra ji, stylistically they show influence coming from Eastern India. So obviously they are 7th century bronzes. I'm not saying that they are early, but what I want to say here is the influence, the connections, east-west connections, though as we see in the early period, they continued even in the later period. So even after the fall of Roman Empire, though there was a lull in Indo-Roman trade, probably these east-west connections helped Sopara to survive and prosper. Sopara Stupa is obviously one of the most significant monument from the area what we know about. It is interesting to see that that stupa was opened numerous times. It was enlarged over the period of time. So obviously the core probably belonged to Mauryan or pre-Mauryan period, that we really do not know, but definitely from the Mauryan period onwards we have that stupa existing there. And then it was opened during the Satavahana period when there were gold flowers were installed in the stupa, and a coin of Yajnesri Satakarni was placed in the casket. Then probably it was opened again in 7th century during the Rashtrakuta period, 7th, 8th century Rashtrakuta period, where we have those bronzes coming up from the stupa. And it continued probably to the medieval period. So it has been opened and enlarged over the period of time. So when we look at the stupa, like there is a core which is made of simple bricks, but when we look at the outer periphery, there are certain molded bricks also coming from 5th, 6th century AD, which were used for the construction of stupa. And they are scattered in the area. I'm not saying that those are in situ right now, but on site you get those molded bricks to see. See, unfortunately, there is no major excavation taken up about the habitational site, because there is no archaeological mound as such for the habitational site which we come across at Sopara. So what we are trying to do right now, like our generation of archaeologists, we are trying to use alternate methods of understanding Sopara. So some like modern technology has been used for like radar survey or kind of things, which give us some idea about the area which was under habitation during the early period. But definitely there is no way, at least till the day, we know about what kind of structures were there and other things. But there are two important sources which talk about Sopara as city. One is Buddhist literary source, that is Divyavadana, which gives us a detailed description of city of Sopara with all 17 gates and how the structures were there and settlement pattern was there. And on the other hand, in Ajanta paintings, there is a depiction of Sopara city. I'm not saying that that is a factual depiction. That is obviously the artist's imagination in 5th century AD, but still it gives us some idea about the settlement. When we look at Purnavadana, it talks about various communities and castes living in a particular area, basically forming their clusters. So each of these community have their own cluster and well-defined area where they evolved as you can say over the period of time they settled rather, and they evolved as a particular settlement. Looking at the archaeological evidence from the obviously later period, because early Satavahana sites are very few to identify, which were later occupied in the Rashtrakuta and Shilahara period, they tell us that these smaller clusters of habitation evolved along the water bodies which were there, and those water bodies were assigned sanctity over the period of time to maintain their purity and the you can say the association with the habitational area. So probably as what we see in the Konkan, Sopara was also a small township, because we do not see large cities.
The site of Sopara was significant, as is evident from the vast network of over 100 caves that acted as a residence for Buddhist monks here in Kanheri. Sopara was at the height during the heyday of the Indo-Roman trade between the 2nd century BCE and the 3rd century CE. But interestingly, it also remained relevant for centuries to come as the axis shifted.
After fall of Roman Empire, there was, as we all know, lull in the Indo-Roman trade, but that was revived after within couple of centuries by the Arabs, and the Indo-Arab trade was kind of the focal point, and that was mainly between the West Asia and Southeast Asia, and we served as a nodal point kind of thing on that. Now Sopara being the early port, it saw the revival kind of thing in the Arab period also, because there are couple of Arab traders who talk about Thane and Sopara in their travelogue. And then when we look at Shilahara period, so from especially from 10 to 13th century AD, when we see that particular period, the recent explorations have shown us that there was kind of extensive growth in the habitational area. So the recent surveys which we did in last couple of years we could document more than 300 antiquities scattered in the region from 10th to 13th century AD, indicating that there were structures, probably religious structures associated with Hindus and Jains. And if you are to number the temples existed in the region, it was more than 15 temples in the small area of Sopara and Agashi. So see, why I'm emphasizing the number of temples is, when we talk about temples, they are associated with a particular settlement pattern. They do not exist in isolation. They are being supported by a particular system, maybe a township or a self-sufficient village. And now when we see this large quantity of data coming up from Shilahara period, definitely that was a revival of Sopara. And collectively, when we study the revenue, the probable revenue which is generated by all these settlements, makes us think that that was an urban center. Now there is a concrete reference from literature coming from Shilahara period itself. There was a poet called Sodhala. He describes Sopara as an urban center. Then Sopara in inscriptions of Shilahara period is being referred as a political or administrative center. So definitely when we look at the archaeological evidence, epigraphical sources and literary sources, it portrays Sopara as one of the richest commercial center in this on the western coast, probably.
The gradual decline of Sopara as a cosmopolitan port city had a lot to do with changes no one could control. The rivers that allowed it access to the hinterland when it was a port, over time, choked the city.
Siltation, like when we look at the siltation which is done by River Ulhas, the rate of siltation is very high. And some of the scholars today genuinely think that it is because of the deforestation in the medieval period in the region of like the catchment of the Ulhas river. And if we see today, Ulhas is a backbone for Mumbai metropolitan region. So the entire Mumbai metropolitan region has evolved around Ulhas, and in last 400 years, the major deforestation has taken place, and that has resulted into various issues related to siltation which we are facing even today of the river Ulhas. The same thing happens with Vaitarna, but the rate of siltation is relatively low. But Vaitarna has a tributary called Surya, which brings in, which also brings in major silt, contributing to the siltation of the channel, which was responsible for making Sopara as a port. But prior to that, definitely there was a gradual siltation which was taking up. And what we can see from epigraphical data related to Sopara and Bassein is the Shilahara period and the post-Shilahara period in the pre-Portuguese period that marks the gradual shift from Sopara to Bassein. So the riverine port to the open sea port, that gradual shift is probably because of the gradual siltation, and that makes the rise of Vasai, because the region is important, and if you have to control the resources over there, you cannot just shift the political center. So they have shifted to the south, and then they have come up with the open sea port. I understand that the designs of vessels, the ships also have changed, and again that is supported by the shipbuilding activity which continued in the Portuguese period, because we can see there are various centers which were used by Portuguese for shipbuilding in the region under their control. So that suggests that from 10th to 14th century, it was a gradual siltation which shifted the entire focus from Sopara to Bassein. But still, till 17th century, this Ulhas River Valley played a vital role, because as we know, the first ships of the Maratha Navy were constructed in Ulhas, like Kalyan and Bhiwandi area, and they were taken out to the sea from the Ulhas river. And we know that there was, you can say, like, there were letters talking about like communication between Shivaji Maharaj and Portuguese governors of Bassein. So till 17th century, this was a major, you can say, riverine activity center, as we understand. But gradually it has came to an end, and the rise of Mumbai has, like Mumbai as a port, has grabbed all the opportunities given to Chaul and Sopara, and it virtually came to an end in every aspect.
Go to Sopara today and you will find little evidence of its glorious past. One of the only markers of it are the remains of the Sopara Stupa that was first excavated by renowned archaeologist Bhagwan Lal Inderji in the late 19th century. A lot of the material found there has been housed at the Asiatic Society in Mumbai.
There is no major tangible evidence coming from the archaeological sources except, or rather no tangible evidence talked about Sopara, and that is the only protected site or two protected sites from like Burud Rajasa Kot and the Gas Stupa. Rest of the sites are not like considered as protected sites in the region of Sopara, and that is because archaeological mounds are absent. The nature of habitations in ancient or medieval period at Sopara were responsible for you can say absence of large archaeological mounds. For example, when you look at Paitan or Ter or Nasik, there are huge archaeological mounds, huge habitational deposit which you see in the form of archaeological mound, which you do not see at Sopara, and that is probably because of the nature of habitation itself. You know, at these other sites like Ter or Nasik or Paitan, where the layers of habitations were one above the other, and the raw material which was used was totally different than the material which probably used at Sopara. You know, and another factor which is a key factor, and that is rainfall, which is heavy rainfall, and most of the material is washed off. So when we look at Sopara, the oral tradition and memory, historical memory about Sopara is fragmented. Jains remembered about Jain past, Buddhists remember about Buddhist past, Hindu remembered about Hindu past. So if we talk about a Hindu, traditionally he knows about how Sopara was a great city and a like religious center. When you talk about Jain past, they talk about the glorious Sopara and how merchants were coming there and how Tirthankars have visited that place, etc. etc. So that is primarily because this memory is fragmented. So if you see all the fragments together, you get a complete picture, because Buddhists talk about the remote ancient past, Jains and Hindus talk about early medieval and medieval past, and then when you relate it with archaeological evidence. For example, when you talk about Burud Rajasa Kot, the memories, like in folklore, in oral tradition, there is a collection of oral tradition or folklore called Sashticha Goshti, compiled by Durga Bhagwat, which is a translation of some folklore published in Indian antiquary in the 19th century. So that gives us some understanding how tribals, how local communities have perceived Sopara as an important commercial and religious center. Again, the memories, historical memories related to Sopara are fragmented with communities. Like for example, Pachkalshi or Somavanshi Kshatriya, they remember their glorious contribution.
While there aren't many remains from the ancient period when Sopara was an important port city, evidence of the storied history of Sopara is strewn everywhere. In the Brahma temple from the Shilahara period close to the old stupa, and the old Jain temple here.
There is a center at Agashi called Agashi Tirtha, and it is considered in literature as the extension of Palitana. So it was a part of that sacred landscape. So Palitana sacred landscape, and then like if you see Vividha Tirthakalpa, it describes Sopara as one of the most important Jain Tirtha. This is Shilahara period, I will say, Rashtrakuta Shilahara period, when Jains become very prominent in this region. There was a temple, like there are a couple of temples, like one was at probably this Chakreshwar Tirtha and other was at Gas. The present Agashi Tirtha has bronzes, inscribed bronzes coming from 14th, 15th century. There is a big temple and there is also a story associated with that. Like the Tirthankara image was found in the Chakreshwar Tirtha and they were carrying it to Palitana, and at one point like the cart broke down and the image refused to move ahead. This was 19th century. And then the Agashi Tirtha temple, the present temple, like the image was kept in a small shrine or kind of thing. Then there was a dream seen by a merchant who had a major losses in his trade because of some cyclone or something. So he took a vow saying, if like my business is like revive or kind of thing, I will construct a temple. And in 20th century the temple was constructed. So these kinds of traditions, like we have such references to Agashi Tirtha in 11th, 12th century also. So since then till 20th century we have this oral tradition continued, you know, related to Agashi Tirtha. And similar tradition can be seen from 7th, 8th century onwards in Hindu Puranas. So it's quite interesting and complex relation.
Few people who live in Sopara today, or even in the Mumbai metropolitan region as a whole, know of Sopara's fabulous past or how important the site was in the spread of Buddhism in India and far outside. 2,300 years ago, this was part of a connected world. Until the focal point shifted south, first to Bassein or Vasai during the Portuguese period, and later further south to the fort area during the British period. Today, a lot needs to be done to showcase the history of Sopara and its rich past.